Most people believe that saving the planet and making money are opposites. That profit is the problem. That greed created this crisis. That the only way to fix it is to sacrifice. But here's what almost nobody says out loud. Some of the most profitable companies on Earth right now are making their money by solving climate change. Not despite the crisis, because of it. And once you understand how that works, you realize the line between environmentalism and capitalism isn't where most people think it is. Most of us feel the same way about climate change. We know it's real. We feel vaguely guilty. We recycle when it's convenient. We buy the reusable bag. But the scale of the problem feels so enormous that individual action seems meaningless. You're one person. The oil companies are trillion-dollar institutions. What can you actually do? And somewhere underneath that question is a deeper one. If climate change is such a serious threat, why hasn't the market fixed it yet? Why are fossil fuel companies still the most powerful corporations on the planet? Why does it take 100 international summits to achieve modest, incremental progress? The answer isn't laziness. It isn't denial. It's something more structural than that. For most of the last century, destroying the environment was free. You could burn coal, dump chemicals, clear forests, and never pay for the damage. Think about what that actually means. When a coal plant burns fuel and releases carbon into the atmosphere, that carbon stays there for hundreds of years. It warms the planet. It raises sea levels. It intensifies storms. It triggers droughts that destroy harvests on the other side of the world. All of that damage is real. It has a cost. But that cost never appeared on the coal company's books. The cost went somewhere. It just didn't go to the company doing the damage. It went to communities, to ecosystems, to the atmosphere. Economists call this an externality. And for a long time, the entire global economy was built on the assumption that nature had no price tag. That assumption is now changing. And the people who understood that change first got very, very rich. Here's the core idea. Markets don't respond to moral arguments. They respond to incentives. And for most of history, there was no financial incentive to reduce carbon emissions. Pollution was cheaper than the alternative, so the market kept producing it. But over the last 2 decades, something shifted. Governments started putting a price on carbon. They created systems where companies had to pay for their emissions or buy credits from companies that produced fewer of them. Suddenly, clean air had a dollar value. And the moment that happened, the entire logic of the market flipped. Solving climate change stopped being a cost. It became a product. Daniel is 34 years old. He lives in Portland, Oregon, and works as a sustainability analyst for a mid-size manufacturing firm. 3 years ago, his job barely existed. His company hired him as a kind of PR function, someone to write the annual sustainability report, make the website look responsible, attend the right conferences. Nobody expected him to generate revenue. Then the regulations changed. New federal guidelines required his company to report emissions across its entire supply chain, not just from its own facilities, but from every vendor and partner it worked with. Suddenly, the company had a problem it needed to solve, and Daniel was the only person in the building who understood the language. His role transformed almost overnight. He started advising procurement teams on which suppliers had lower carbon footprints. He identified inefficiencies in the logistics operation that were costing the company both money and emissions credits. He helped negotiate contracts structured around carbon performance targets. Within 2 years, Daniel's team had identified over $4 million in operational savings, tied directly to emission reductions. He wasn't saving the planet as an act of charity. He was saving the planet because it was the most profitable thing his company could do. That's not a coincidence. That's the system working exactly as designed. The mechanism behind Daniel's transformation has a name. It's called a cap and trade system. Here's how it works. A government or regulatory body sets a hard limit. a cap on the total amount of carbon a group of companies can collectively emit. Each company gets an allocation of permits. Each permit allows them to emit a certain amount. If a company emits more than its permits allow, it has two choices: pay a fine or buy extra permits from a company that didn't use all of theirs. That second option created something new, a market for the right to emit carbon. And like any market, it has winners and losers. The companies that reduce their emissions below their cap don't just avoid fines. They accumulate permits they can sell. Clean production became a tradable commodity. The European Union launched its emissions trading system in 2005, the largest carbon market in the world. It covered over 10,000 power plants, factories, and industrial facilities across Europe. By 2024, the price of a carbon permit in Europe had climbed to levels that made emission reductions genuinely cheaper than continuing to pollute. Companies weren't going green out of conscience. They were going green because the math changed. The United States has its own version, operating at the state level. California's Cap-and-Trade program, launched in 2013, covers roughly 80% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions. It has generated billions in auction revenue, money that California has reinvested into clean energy and low-income community programs. The point isn't that these systems are perfect. The point is that they fundamentally altered the incentive structure. Before carbon pricing, a factory manager asking whether to invest in cleaner equipment was asking a question about values. After carbon pricing, that same manager is asking a question about spreadsheets. And spreadsheets, it turns out, are a much more reliable driver of behavior than values. Here's a story that illustrates this mechanism better than any policy paper ever could. For years, Tesla was not actually a profitable car company. It burned through cash. Elon Musk famously said the company was within weeks of bankruptcy. But during those years, Tesla had one business line that was almost pure profit. It was selling something it produced automatically as a byproduct of making electric vehicles. Carbon credits. Every electric car Tesla sold earned the company regulatory credits under US and European emissions rules. Tesla had more of these credits than it could use, so it sold them to companies like Fiat, to legacy automakers who needed the credits to comply with emission standards without actually building cleaner cars. By the end of 2024, Tesla had earned over $10 billion from carbon credit sales since 2009. In 2024 alone, that number was $2.76 billion, a 54% increase from the year before. At certain points in Tesla's history, carbon credit revenue was the only thing keeping the company in the black. Let that land for a moment. One of the most celebrated technology companies in American history was, for years, primarily a carbon credit trading business that also made electric cars on the side. The legacy automakers buying those credits, Ford, Fiat, others, were essentially paying Tesla a fee to keep building internal combustion engines for a few more years. They were renting Tesla's clean air record to use as a compliance shield. And Tesla took that money and reinvested it into battery technology, factory capacity, and R&D. The climate crisis didn't just create Tesla's market, it funded Tesla's survival. Tesla is just one data point inside a much larger shift. The global ESG investing market, that's environmental, social, and governance investing, was valued at nearly $30 trillion in 2024. That number is projected to reach $127 trillion by 2034. To put that in perspective, that's larger than the GDP of the United States and China combined. Investors aren't putting that money into green funds because they want to feel good. They're doing it because climate risk has become financial risk. Insurance companies are pricing it. Mortgage lenders are factoring it into coastal property loans. The Federal Reserve has started assessing how climate exposure affects bank stability. And the carbon credit market itself barely a line item a decade ago, was valued at $657 billion in 2024 and projected to grow to $16 trillion by 2034. That's a 25-fold increase in 10 years. Here's the counterintuitive part. For most of modern history, environmental damage was invisible to markets. It was what economists call a negative externality, a cost that exists in the real world but doesn't show up on a balance sheet. The river got polluted, but no company ever had to pay for the river. What's happening now is that the externality is being internalized. Regulations, carbon pricing, ESG disclosure requirements. They are all doing the same thing. They are forcing the hidden costs of environmental damage onto the balance sheets of the companies creating that damage. And when a cost gets internalized, it becomes a business problem. And when it becomes a business problem, the market builds a solution. Because that's what markets do. Here's where it gets complicated. Not everyone benefits equally from this transition. The green economy creates enormous opportunity, but it concentrates that opportunity in familiar places. The companies building the solutions to climate change are, largely, the same kinds of companies that built the systems creating it. Large corporations, well-capitalized investors, firms with access to government contracts and regulatory expertise. A small solar installation company in rural America doesn't have the lawyers to navigate carbon credit markets. A community trying to protect its forest doesn't have the financial infrastructure to monetize the carbon its trees are absorbing. But a private equity firm does. And over the last decade, private equity has been buying up carbon offset projects, forests, wetlands, agricultural land, at a significant pace. They're not doing this out of environmental conviction. They're doing it because carbon is now a commodity, and commodities can be owned. There's also a more uncomfortable truth underneath all of this. The same financial logic that made it profitable to destroy the environment. Extracting value, externalizing costs, moving on, is now being applied to restoring it. Clean energy is booming, but so are green bonds issued by companies that also lobby against emissions regulations. Carbon offsets are proliferating, but studies have found that a significant portion of voluntary carbon credits, particularly forest preservation credits, don't represent real, additional, permanent carbon reductions. In some cases, trees that were never actually at risk of being cut down were certified as protected and sold as offsets. A 2023 investigation found that more than 90% of Verra's rainforest offset credits, Verra being one of the largest carbon certification bodies in the world, may not represent real carbon reductions. Companies used those credits to claim carbon neutrality. The planet didn't notice. This is what happens when you price a public good. Measurement becomes political. Verification becomes a business. And the incentive to appear green can outpace the incentive to be green. The problem got priced. The pricing created a market. And the market, being a market, found ways to profit from the perception of progress as much as from progress itself. This doesn't mean the system is worthless. It means the system is human. Here's the uncomfortable question at the center of all of this. Is it a good thing that climate change has become profitable? The honest answer is probably yes, and definitely complicated. The moral argument for saving the planet failed for decades. Summits were held. Reports were published. Scientists warned. Activists marched. Carbon emissions kept rising. What actually started moving the needle, slowly, imperfectly, unevenly, was when the financial system started pricing the problem. When destroying the environment became expensive and fixing it became lucrative, capital started flowing in the right direction. That's not inspiring, but it might be more effective than inspiration ever was. The deeper truth is this. We built a civilization on the assumption that nature was free. Free to use. Free to degrade. Free to extract without consequence. And for a long time, the market agreed. Now the market is changing its mind. Not because the market developed a conscience, but because the cost of ignoring nature finally became impossible to hide. The crisis didn't stop. It got monetized. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only way a system built on profit ever really changes. Not when we ask it to do the right thing, but when the right thing becomes the most profitable option on the table.